right, Ush, welcome once again to another interview, Successors Skills and Drills concerning the life and the system of Dr. Moses Powell, and now Grand Professor Vee and Vee Jitsu, Vee Jitsu, all Vee. And today we have a special guest. I mean, I'm excited because he's so brilliant and he's so willing to share. We have with us one of the successors, one of the founders, one of the heirs to Vee Jitsu, the one and only Grandmaster Frank Edwards Jr., better known as Cal.
Yes.
Ush. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. So we're going to get right to it. We're going to be discussing Vee Jitsu 55, Vee Jitsu 75, Vee Jitsu 65. What is the difference? We're going to talk about the systems that Professor Vee passed down to who he chose and why. We're going to talk about Kung Fu Walk. We're going to talk about the major katas. We're going to talk about the academic part of the martial arts that most people just forget about. We're going to talk about the individuals who received the systems and the names of those systems. And we're just going to go everything Vee Jitsu, but of course we're going to talk about Dr. Moses Powell and Sanukas. This, I guarantee, will be a part 2 because the information that he has shared with me has blown my mind. He's scholarly, but before we start, I do want to pay respects to his father, Grandmaster Frank Edwards Sr., Pop Edwards. This is his father. He worked with Professor Vee, and they put together a curriculum for Professor Vee. It's very thorough, very detailed, and it does not miss a beat. And we'll talk about his father during the interview. So let's start this way. Let's start, of course, when did you first come into the martial arts? When did you and your father first start with? You started with Dr. Moses Powell, but tell us when you started with Professor Vee and how that went, just briefly, so they can get a little insight.
A little bit back in the 70s, my original teacher, Robert J. Cooper, brought us to Dr. Moses Powell because he wanted something different, because we were working with Soki Lil John and Professor Robert Crossan, and they said, well, you got to go see Professor Powell. And from there, that's how we were introduced to Moses. And we got into working out with him during the whole summer, and we enjoyed ourselves, but there were certain things that we needed a little bit more of, and that's how we eventually had to look forward to Professor Vee himself.
Okay, so let's talk about Dr. Moses Powell and how you first discovered his ability. So let's give us a story about the Oriental world of martial arts and what you saw Moses do and things of that nature.
Well, Dr. Powell, at that time, the first Oriental world of self-defense with Aaron Banks. He had a number of masters from all over, and Dr. Powell and Tiger Kim actually stole that show. Their techniques, their abilities, everything they did, from the kicks, the Professor, Dr. Powell, the finger roll out, the techniques, everything was something out of the ordinary for martial artists at that time. Something really above the level. So a lot of people don't understand what I mean above the level. They were doing things that were ahead of their time, way ahead of their time.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So what you said that Dr. Moses Powell and Master Tiger Kim stole the show. Who were some of the other masters on that show?
Oh, you had Ronald Duncan, you had Fred Miller, Fred Hamilton, a bunch of other martial artists. But what the interesting thing was when they had all the other Kung Fu masters and everybody come up together and actually go one-on-one with each other. Just little hand-off techniques or whatever. And they couldn't do anything with Dr. Powell. They couldn't do anything with Dr. Powell because between the punches, the strikes, if you're not there, you can't get hit. And that's what Doc used to do all that. I can't hit. You can't hit me if I'm not there.
So he would disappear?
He would disappear and then pop them as they're going by.
Wow, wow, awesome.
And the same thing like with Tiger King. His leg work was unbelievable. And this is what made them stand out. Their individual setups, their technique was outstanding where they outshined everybody else that was there.
Yes, sir. Wow. What year was this?
Oh, I was young then. I'm telling you, this is like maybe 71, 72, something in there. I was young then.
Who were some of the known masters that Dr. Powell taught that you knew of? People who went on to develop their own systems and made names for themselves.
Well, of course, you know, my two favorite was Soaky Lil John Davis and Robert Crossan.
Yes,
you know, everybody knows Sugar.
Yes, sir.
And
yes, sir.
A couple of other ones, they were very, very insight. They gave you the knowledge, and there was a comforting zone. A lot of people can actually do the martial arts, and they're great martial artists, but not everybody can teach.
Yes,
that's another board game in itself.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And so that's what made the difference when they were able to actually teach us, not just show us. It's a different ball game.
You know, I've come across a lot of martial artists, and they always talk about Ed Pugh and EP system.
Oh, yes.
Was he a student of Dr. Moses Powell?
My original teacher, Robert J. Cooper, was a student of Ed Pugh and Calvin Myers,
Yes,
who were students of Dr. Moses Powell.
Hush.
So it's a family tree, goes all the way down.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, great. So, have you ever seen or experienced or heard a story of Dr. Moses Powell fighting or getting attacked on the street? Not in the dojo, I mean on the street.
Oh, I know a personal story because Dr. Powell was friends and good friends with my own personal cousin, my family member,
Yes, sir.
Robert LaFord, and he came to the Bronx one time. 'Cause I'm a Bronx boy. And he came to the Bronx, and it was in the Monroe High School section. And Moses was a big man, and he rocked from side to side, and occasionally looked like he was under influence of alcohol. And these 5 guys thought they were going to take him off, and he laid them out. All 5 of them, when they had to get ambulance, picked them up.
So you're saying the way he walked, it looked like he was
Because he rocked, he moved, and he looked like he was always intoxicated with alcohol or something, but that was his walk.
That was his natural walk.
His natural walk.
Yes, sir.
But to have him lay out 5 guys at one shot, that was impressive.
Yes, sir. Concerning Moses Powell, Lucas Rue, and Grand Professor Vee and Vee Jitsu, you started with Dr. Moses Powell, and then of course you transferred over to Professor Vee. Why did a lot of people go from Dr. Powell? I know he sent some students to Professor Vee, but why did a lot of students go to Professor Vee after studying Professor Powell? I mean, I've heard stories that he was just too lethal with stuff.
That is correct. That is exactly correct. He was lethal, and the method of training, sometimes people couldn't understand it or handle it, and it was a little bit too rough for them, or not enough breakdown. What I mean by breakdown, a lot of teachers will give you techniques or different codiforms, and they don't break down each individual piece of it so you can learn easily.
Right. So Doc was more of a, if you were talented or you were a fast learner, you could pick it up.
Right.
You needed special
detailed
attention. That was Professor Vee's specialty?
That was Professor Vee's specialty.
Wow.
Starting you from scratch.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That meant a lot. And it's a big family tree, like I said, dealing with from Robert Cooper to Ed Pugh, Calvin Myers to Doc Powell, right to Professor Vee.
Yes, sir.
Because it's all a family tree.
So just briefly tell us, how was a class with Professor Vee? What were the drills? What was his way of teaching that made it so popular?
Professor was warm-hearted.
Hush.
That's one of the things you got to understand. He was a kind soul, and he moved everything gracefully. And you see a little tiny man, if he was 98 pounds soaking wet, it was something, because he would throw the biggest of them like nothing. I saw him throw Doc around like it was nothing. And this is a huge man, and this little tiny, and that's impressive.
Hush.
Very impressive.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. So, this is a question. I know the answer, but a lot of people don't know. Can you tell us what the ranking system is in Vee Jitsu? For example, in Sunlookers, we have white belt, yellow belt, green belt, purple belt, third Q brown, second Q brown, first Q brown, and then you go to Shodan, first degree,
Right.
of course, to 10th Dan,
Right.
and black. So what is the ranking system in Vee Jitsu?
And Vee Jitsu 75. I'm going to speak for one I know of. I'm not going to deviate to the other ones because they all change up. I'm speaking from Vee Jitsu 75. You've got white, yellow, green. Brown 3, brown 2, brown 1, then Shodan.
Yes, sir. Okay, okay. And since you brought that up, let's talk about Vee Jitsu 55, Vee Jitsu 65, Vee Jitsu 75. Is there a difference? Is there a lot of similarities? Is it different art forms, or is it just the progressive mind of Grand Professor Vee as he grew?
Exactly what it is. Professor's mind was progressive. As he grew, he added on. The 55 group were more basic judo, and they did a little goju, but basically they were judo. And that was, you had Mr. Powers, and you had Rick Riccardi. They were the ones in charge of 55.
Yes, sir.
Of course, when 65 came along, Doc was in charge of that at the beginning, the way he did it, and then Professor moved it on to other players that were both Vee Jitsu and Sunukis, and they crossed back and forth between the lines. 75 became something totally different because by that time, Professor Vee had touched more of the Japanese arts with the Chinese when he added the Kung Fu and other different things inside. So that made it different again because he was constantly adding. So the basis of Vee Jitsu, of all three, the 55, 65, and 75, is exactly the same with additive things onto it.
So, okay, so you're saying that Vee Jitsu 55, Vee Jitsu 65, and Vee Jitsu 75 are the same, except it's like having a bowl of soup, and today you added fresh garlic, and the next time you had that same soup, you added fresh onions and cloves.
And the garlic.
And the garlic. The
right.
garlic remained.
The garlic remained.
So it was the same, but each progression had an
add-on. Exactly. It had an addition.
Wow. Wow. Interesting. Okay. What about the 1 through 24?
1 through 24, the 65 group. It was done in numbers because at that time it was easier for them to document it and run it through as when you working out in the classroom, you know exactly which one you were going to next, back to back to back. It's the coliforms, which every system has some form of coliform. Coliforms are nothing but shadow boxing, like the boxers do. And you're practicing what you're doing in the air, but you're imitating you had an opponent in front of you.
Imaginary opponent.
Imaginary opponent in front of you.
Very good, yes, sir.
So that's where the 1 to 24 were nothing but coliforms. And now the same forms were pulled forward to 75. Only difference now, not just as numbers, but as names. Each one became a name. So the first 5 of 1 to 24 now became the first 5 handles. The next group, which was originally 4 punches, became, the 4 MPs became 6 MPs, and we just called it straight up the MPs.
Yes.
So the numbers basically still was there. It's just that we put them in small groups for the students to learn easier. See, again, remember, people don't understand, not everybody learns as quickly, or they're not as prepared for this different thing, because their bodies never did anything like this before.
Right. Yes.
They're brand new.
Right.
So now you got to break it down to them step by step, so they can learn each factor one at a time, and then they progress better.
Yes, sir. Okay, so in that, like in Sanukas, we have the Iron Man. In Vee Jitsu is humanized
Makiwara. Yes.
When did that come into play? 65, 75? Or was that in 55? When did that
It transferred from all three. It was in 55, but it was so balanced where it was very small growing. By the time 65 came along, it became a wider, more broad setup. And that's when it, you know, they put a little more to it, a little more oomph, a little more work to it.
Yes, sir.
And by the time it hit 75, now it became the humanized Makiwara, where it's not just one group. We have 3 different groups, and each group has 10.
Okay. So, all right, we're going to stay on Vee Jitsu for a while. You just explained that some of the Vee Jitsu was documented in numbers. And
Correct.
then it progressed to names. Okay. Where did Kung Fu Walk come from? Was it just an exercise, or was it actually a fighting technique, or was it something to strengthen your body?
Kung Fu Walk came in as professor at virtual out to different Kung Fu masters. He learned the basic setup of these particular hand and leg movements. So this way, you progress in whatever attack formation that was coming at you. And one of the easiest way for people to really understand what we talk about the Kung Fu Walk, I believe it was the Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee, when he was fighting this boxer, and he stood in front of the gentleman, and he took one step, but it was so quick, when he took the step, he hit the man at the exact same time. And the man was dazed, and he says, wait a minute, he didn't move. He did move. He moved so quickly with the same strike, using another thing people don't understand. Bruce Lee used a lot of the American boxing techniques, yes, combined with the Chinese setup, is what the Kung Fu Walk was about too. Because it allowed you to get on your opponent faster than he can believe you can get to it. And as a short man myself, I always had the opposition of dealing with gentlemen with long arms, long legs. The legs were too long, I couldn't hit them. So I made sure I knew how to get in so I could attack that gentleman. And where I can defend just as well, vanishing and going back. And that's what the Kung Fu Walk, that you could go forward, backwards, sideways.
Lush. Okay. Now here's something I'm not too familiar with, and I'm sure the listening audience may not, unless they're students of you. 3 Vee stars.
Oh boy. 3 Vee stars. These are 3 different techniques that only Vee Jitsu 75 had. They're basically set up from Kung Fu movements. They're Chinese orientated. And it's very tight, very small for the smaller man. Remember, most of the Chinese were smaller people, and they're fighting against great, larger people. They had to accomplish great defeats and taking these people out. The 3 Vee stars are short moves that you twist and wind, and the twisting of your body gives you the power that's needed. If you're physically not that strong, this gives you the strength, because the power comes not just from your arms and your shoulders, it comes from your hips and your legs.
Ush. Yes, sir. Okay. And with that in mind, explain the major katas, major and minor katas of Vee Jitsu.
Okay. In the 1 to 24, you have both the minor and the major kata forms. They're in number setups. And Vee Jitsu 75, they were broken down to minor kata forms for the lower belts to learn the basic fundamentals of their body, how to learn how to punch, how to block, how to kick. By the time you got to the majors, now you were putting those formats into small techniques. That's all they were, small techniques. And if you took a step further, then that's when you got into the taste, and it was complete full techniques now. And again, like the 65, you had take group 1. Some had part of group 2. But 75 has take group 1, 2, and 3. Again, this is constantly Professor Vee adding and growing the knowledge himself, going to different schools, learning, progressing it, and adding it into the Vee Jitsu system.
Yes, sir. Okay, all right. Testing in Vee Jitsu. Just describe how you got graded and tested in Vee Jitsu. Who were some of the major players involved in the testing, and how did that go?
Well, for my dojo, you know, we were Bronxdale Self-Defense Club, my father and myself, Pop and Cowboy. We centered everything around Professor Vee.
Yes, sir.
We had Professor Vee dead center, my father, Professor Danny Polo, one of the other Vee Jitsu players, Jose Velez, my original teacher, Robert J. Cooper, and many other black belts on the table. Most of the time, during our promotion, I ran the floor, meaning I gave the commands, I gave everything, the bowing to the table, the whole bit, because I ran all the students, and occasionally we even had students from other dojos come and take the test with us. But again, I ran the setup for that, and we wanted to make sure no matter which one of the table members came down to the floor to give commands, the commands for all the students were all the same. It was never anything different from one teacher to the next. They knew exactly what you were talking about. The commands were all the same. And that was one of the jobs I had, was to make sure the promotion setup and the guidelines were all put together from Professor Vee the way he wanted it, but I did the paperwork.
Okay, let me ask you this. Of course, we know you mentioned that Doc ran Vee Jitsu 65, but of course he ventured off into Sanukas.
Right.
However, he still had a connection, a loyalty, and a love, and a responsibility to Grand Professor Vee. So, have you ever experienced Doc Powell showing up at a Vee Jitsu test just to make sure?
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's
we had many times, we had Sunday class on Remsen Street with Jonathan Stewart, and when 75 was formed, we had different black belts from all different organizations, and they became part of 75. And there was one particular day, Soaky Little John says, someone else is coming this time, not just myself and Lumumba, a couple other ones.
Yes, sir.
And we had no clue it was Dr. Powell. We had no clue.
Yes, sir.
And Doc showed up, and here it is now. Promotion was being given, and this was high-ranking promotion.
Yes,
so
sir.
Doc came in, and he says, I want to see my teacher still got his stuff together. And everybody that got promoted that day, Doc threw them all over the place. Himself. He wanted to see if it was real, or the old schools, they would say it was real or it was memory. Oh, believe me, his stuff was real.
Yes, sir.
Definitely real. There was nothing to play with when Doc got a hold of you.
Wow. So in other words, you say you trained with my teacher, Professor Vee. I want to know, and you have to show me that you had what he gave you.
Exactly.
You do it right.
He made sure that you had what Professor Vee gave you. If you didn't, he'd let you know.
Wow. Wow.
Dr. Moses did not play that. No, he made sure you knew what you were doing. That was a guarantee. He made sure.
So you mentioned Grandmaster Lil John Davis showed up, Grandmaster Lamont showed up. Have you ever tested alongside them or had to interact with them for a test in front of Moses?
I'm sorry, I left one name out. Robert Cross, Sugar.
Yes, sir.
Mo said, okay, you guys are good karate guys because my background in the karate end of it, I'm Chung Kwan Taekwondo.
Yes, sir.
And most of the other jiu-jitsu or sunukis, Vee Jitsu, they were all Shotokan or Goju, they were all from different. You didn't see a lot of Taekwondo artists. And so Doc says, okay, let's see the fighting side of it. Let's see the comedic end of it. And he had just, Robert, come fight this guy.
This is Doc calling
Sugar out.
Yes, sir.
And see, Sugar like John and Rudy Jones, who also was there. These guys were my idols. These guys helped teach me and my father.
Yes,
and we worked with them constantly. So I couldn't fight them.
Right.
I was too afraid to fight them because the respect I have for these gentlemen.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I started the community with Sugar. Sugar was lightning fast.
Yes,
I was all afraid that he's lightning fast.
Yes, sir.
So we're working out, we're doing it, and he threw a kick and he popped me in my eye, and Doc turned his head, looked, yeah, here we go again. And Soki says, no, Doc, that's not what the case is. He respects Robin too much. Same way he does with me and Rudy. He said, Cowboy, fight him.
Yes, sir.
Let him see what you really have.
Yes, sir.
And then Sugar said, yeah. He said, leave the respect thing to the side for a little bit. Fight me.
Yes, sir.
Don't worry. I understand if I get popped, it'll be my fault, just like you said right away. When you got hit, it was your fault. So we freestyled and had it, comedic. Robert made a move. He came around with these double spinning empties, back to back. I said, oh no, I'm not getting hit by that thing. Spun around and took him out. And he says, you can't take me out. I swept him. I fired him. I was so happy. I just grabbed him. He said, no, continue fighting me. I said, but, sis, he said, no.
Yes, sir.
He says, Doc says, make him fight you, Robert.
Yes, sir.
See, because I had too much respect for those gentlemen.
Yes, sir. Understood.
And I wouldn't fight them.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And I had the same problem with Soapy Little John one time and with Rudy Jones.
Yes, sir.
We used to train in Saturday class with Professor Vee down at Judge Phillips' place. And after class, we all started comedian with freestyle. And I could never hit them because I didn't want them.
Yes, sir.
Until one day, John told me, if you don't hit me, I'm going to make sure I knock you out.
Yes, sir.
Because I'm like, I hit him one time, he hits me 3 times. Right. With this ratio there. So then finally, he made a move, and I knew it was coming real. He says, you don't do something, you get hit.
Yes, sir. I
spun around, and I took him up. His whole body went up in the air, he came slamming down the ground. I'm on the ground like a little kid, like, I got him. Why? Because I practiced for 3 weeks to get this man to sweep him. The techniques that he was using, the double backhand and stuff. I had to counteract his hand, counteract his legs, just to take him out.
Beautiful.
But it was fun. That was the difference. It was no malice involved. This was all, we were trying to outfox each other.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The good old days. So, what about, you mentioned Lumumba. What about Grandmaster Lumumba?
Okay, Lumumba was a little bit different because Lumumba, I met him at New York Community College. It used to be Thursday nights. When we first started, my father, myself, my brother, and my sister was the 3 of us. And my father really wasn't, he was just driving us down there.
Yes, sir.
And the teacher told, get him inside. You're driving the kids, you come inside too. And that's how my father got started. And one day we were doing exercise and basic punching stuff. And Robert J. Cooper always invited or hired one of Doc's students for that night or whatever it was. And it just happened to be Lumumba at this night. And we were going through the basics. I made some movement. And I didn't know the first thing about it. Lumumba was already efficient. He was a third-degree black belt then. I was brand new. He said, you're going to be good. I'm looking like, I don't know the first thing about this.
Right.
He said, you're going to be good. Dad's going to be good. He said, your brother's got a chance too. He said, your whole family's got a line up there. I see what's going on there. And that's where it started, right there, how I learned about the monk prayer, how we worked in different things, and it just grew from there.
Gotcha. Okay. So that was an awesome story too. The fact that Doc made you fight during the test.
Oh, I was scared around it.
Now, this is what I want to do. I interviewed Grandmaster David James. We had a really nice interview. Got a lot of comments, a lot of response, and a lot of people viewed it. A lot of people viewed that interview. So I read something to him, but I want to read it to you and then deal with this. And then we can wind down and we'll deal with part 2 later, because it's going to be a part 2 and it's going to deal with curriculum, the proper way to teach, why Professor Vee chose who he chose, and the difference between being a good practitioner of Vee Jitsu and being a teacher of Vee Jitsu, which is the difference. So here we have Grand Professor Vee had 3 integral stages in his development. Meditation has appointed 4 disciples to oversee the perpetuation of his system of systems. Robert Torres, now this is just what's in this book.
Right.
Robert Torres has been appointed as the successor of Vee Jitsu today. Your father, Frank Edwards Sr., and yourself, Frank Edwards Jr., have been appointed to oversee Vee Artists. And then it says, and David James is the heir to Vee Artist Jitsu. Now, as I read this, it says you and your father will oversee and are the heirs of Vee Artists, and David James is the heir of Vee Artist Jitsu. So to me, that sounds like the same thing. So what I would like you to do is clarify. Let's start with David James, since he's one that I did interview. What system did Professor Vee leave to David James?
Okay, to clarify that, the difference is Vee Jitsu and Vee Jitsu said both were on 75. We kept the 75 title to show that we were different from the 55 and 65. Same thing when we kept the 75 for the Anis. Because what we did with the Anis was, from day 1, everything Professor taught us, we kept it in line in training, kept it in line as part of the regimen. Where with David, he had all at the beginning, and as he started training, there were segments he didn't feel was necessary for certain students, and that's when it came Vietnamese Jiu-Jitsu Ditsu, and people don't understand that Ditsu means something different. Where we had the whole thing. The Ditsu shows where you later to cut things and slice it up and put certain segments together for what was of his time for his students to work and how his students grew.
So Grandmaster David James had Vee Jitsu Ditsu.
Yes.
It's D-I-T?
S-U.
S-U. And you all had Vee Jitsu 75.
Vee Jitsu 75 and Vietnamese 75. Because one is the regular Vee Jitsu stuff and one is the regular Anis.
Got it. Okay. What about Master Torres?
Master Torres worked with the regular Vee Jitsu, like the early stages, like the, what we would say, part of the 65 group. And as they mentioned the 1 to 24 and the TAVE, because they were more specialized in those areas.
Yes, sir.
And see, the TAVE slightly changed with additive, and this is why, like the 65 group why they kept that exactly one way. 75 is no different, it's just there's stuff added on to what was there. It's not changed at all, it's just added on.
Gotcha. Okay. So I'm gonna read this, because this is, you know, documentation means everything. In the court of law, when you're doing business,
right,
buying a home, a car, document means everything. So I have a document here, and I'm first I'm gonna read these systems, these 3 systems that we just talked about.
Right.
It says Vee Jitsu, Jiu-Jitsu, Vee Jitsu Te, Vee Artist Jitsu, Ditsu. And that's in the legal document. You just mentioned it.
Right.
And it says Professor Frank Edwards Jr. and Shion Frank Edwards Jr. Senior.
The senior
is professor, and junior is the Shihan at that time.
Right.
Father and son, it says here, heirs to Vee Jitsu 75 and Vee Artist 75, basic principles of artists, Lanada.
That's it.
Explain that.
Okay. The Lanada came from Mr. Lanada over from the Philippines, who a professor learned from Matt Marinas here in New York, and Matt taught the basic principle of Lanada. The Lanada and Vee Jitsu combined made Vianis. That's what people don't understand. The combination of Vee Jitsu and the Anis made Vianis.
Say that again?
Okay, straight Vee Jitsu.
Yes, sir.
Straight Lanada.
Yes, sir.
Combined made Vianis.
Got it. Okay. I hope you got it, because that was very interesting. Now it says Guru Robert Torres is heir of Vee Jitsu Te.
Okay, the taser.
You explained it, but I'm just reading this document. But you can go on and add on to it.
No, the taser are a particular advanced setup for advanced Vee Jitsu students that are colophons, but really are techniques. And some of them go back and forth, hand to hand, like Doc went along to have the sets.
Yes.
Basically the same thing. Mm-hmm. But the sets, they had 2-man where the tape was still doing it one-on-one like shadow boxing. Mm-hmm. Until eventually we did the tape as shadow boxing also, where you have actual opponent working back to back to back.
Okay. And it says here, Shion David James is heir of Ditsu,
right?
Vee Artist Jitsu.
Yeah,
so you just said that Vee Jitsu and Lanada combined produces Vee Artist.
Correct.
Explain the Ditsu again.
Okay, the Ditsu part of it is some of the early stages, and as progressive with David James, with Professor Vee, there's some of the basic principles that were there, but for training purposes in the dojo and different business people coming into the dojo, there were certain things that had to cut short. They didn't have the time frame to put into the whole setup. They didn't have the time frame.
Right.
So they had to cut certain things short to make it work.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, in our conversations and some of the things you have shared, taught me, you mentioned that there was another system headed by Master Danny Pola. What system was that?
Vee Kwan.
Vee Kwan. And what explain that?
Vee Kwan is Vietnamese, and he had the Taekwondo, because Danny Pola was Taekwondo from Tai Kim Henry Cho and that group of martial artists, and mixed with the Anis, and Vee Kwan was born.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you this question that just popped in my head. Based on this book, based on this legal document, you have Robert Torres, David James, Frank Edwards Sr. and Jr. I know it's more, but these were the first.
Yes.
These were the first, according to this document.
Yes.
So my question to you is, as a living heir to Grand Professor Vee's system of systems, what would you say to the other heirs today in 2023? What statement would you like to make to them? What would you like to share with them? What would you just like to say? Because he chose you guys to represent and keep him alive. So what would you, as a living representative of his system, say to the others? That
one of the things I find out in many of the martial arts, and especially in the Vee Jitsu Vietnamese family, remember what Professor taught you and pass it on. And remember, if he chose other individuals as part of certain parts of his system, be respectful there, because you're basically your brothers and sisters. You're of the same family. Professor Vee was your father. So you're under the same father. And you're still a family. No matter what happened, he's your father.
Yes, sir.
And your brothers and sisters. And just have to have respect for your brothers and sisters.
Yes, sir. Very good. Much like that. Okay. So we're going to conclude, but I just want to bring up a few names, because in my martial arts travels concerning Vee Jitsu, there are certain individuals who I was taught were major players at one time or another. So I'll say their names and you just give a brief story. If it's something funny or just something, a conversation you guys had, something on the mat or anything, just share it. So that way, so let's start with David James. Since we talked about him, and I interviewed, and the whole martial arts family heard from him, David James. What give us a David James story? Brief.
David James wanted to take the Vietnamese system and elevate it to the public level, and that's when 25 Park Place came along, because originally he was on Atlantic and Court in Brooklyn, and he moved it to Manhattan. You know, he had 3 floors, he had a big setup, and it boosted the Vee Jitsu Vietnamese family. Yes, it did, because it's in a territory, you got judges, lawyers, you got all kinds of business people, and that's the clientele he went after. All the big shots and professional people. And there was nothing wrong with that. But where, like I said, he was good on certain ends, and you got to remember, you still got the little people behind there can't afford those big dojo setups and everything, and that's why still some of the smaller dojos still exist.
All right. Here's a name that I know of. He was with Doc. He was with the original Sanukis players from Atlantic Avenue, but he was the baby according to him. CW Post Ken Brown, Senior Sensei Ken Brown. Well, I call him Grandmaster, but he likes to be called Senior Sensei. Just a brief story.
Ken Brown, I worked with him in CW Post. I was a visiting black belt as an heir to help Professor Vee in his traveling arrangements when he went to different schools. I was like an assistant.
Yes, sir.
You know, and I just worked and helped them out anything that can be done. And that was my main job, doing that with Professor Vee. Kenneth Brown, he and I were different to so many, because he realized my Taekwondo background. You could see the format and the kicking and stuff like that. And he says, "You're interesting." He says, "But you gotta let the other ones move ahead." And I'm here to learn. I don't cut anybody up or anything. I'm not here to step on any toes.
Yes,
I'm here to provide a service.
Yes, sir.
That's why I'm here.
Okay. Here's a name that everybody knows. Grandmaster Lou Flair.
Dude, I knew that name was coming. Lou, a long time friend and buddy and rivalry, the whole bit.
Yes, sir.
Lou has been from the 55, the 65, 75 system until all over the place.
Yes, sir.
Because Lou has a hard knock attitude on certain training facilities and stuff.
Yes,
I've ventured where I visited his dojo in Brooklyn, and some of the parents were screaming because they made a mistake on one of their forms, and he made them run around the outside sidewalk out of the dojo,
right.
But they got no shoes on. He said, were they born with shoes?
That sounds like Lou. Yes, sir. Beautiful, beautiful story. Okay. Here's a name that I hear a lot from some of my Vee Jitsu friends. Jonathan Stewart.
Okay. Professor Stewart. God rest the dead now. Professor Stewart was originally he's a Taekwondo gentleman. Just like, myself, but a different format. And Jonathan was always at the tournaments, at this and that. He got attached to the Vee Jitsu family from Professor Vee, and we even made some tours and stuff because we visited Tennessee, Puerto Rico, a lot of the venturing places Professor Vee would go to teach Eagle seminars. Right. Jonathan Stewart ended up going on with us, and he started picking up a little by little, and he wanted to be a part of the Vee Jitsu family. So we started teaching.
Okay. Here's a name that, if you're a Sanukis, if you've been around, you know this person. But just for the viewing audience, Professor Pedro.
Oh yeah. Oh yes. When we were working with Doc, at that time, like my father and stuff, my brother and sister, we all gravitated to Soki, Lil John Sugar, Sensei Harold, a couple of the other ones, and Pedro at that time was second in charge behind Mo, right. Professor Moses, and that was a big thing for us. And you could see the difference in each individual student. They all had different, what we call the plus and minuses.
Yes, sir.
Not all were the same, but everybody had a plus that you can pick something from them. And that was the beautiful thing about it. There was always a plus someplace.
Okay. You mentioned this person earlier. Grandmaster Lil John Davis.
Soki was always been one of my favorite. Him and Robbie Crossan and Rudy Jones, those, and I can't think of Professor Howard's last name.
Harold Oglesby.
The big guy. Because, this guy was a professional lawyer. The whole night he was impressive because he could tear you apart with the law book and then tear you apart with his hand. Impressive.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But Soki had that warm feeling where I worked with him even when he worked at Columbia University, and he was a teacher inside the college there. I worked with him. I had him directly at my parents' house at Tracy Towers. Soki, Professor Vee, and we broke bread. We had a nice time. We had a martial arts class to write in my father's living room.
Yes, sir. And
Soki was with us quite a bit, and we used to have fun. And that's what people didn't understand. There's a difference between just having someone be a martial artist and somebody that you look up to, whatever, but you're friendly with them. It makes a world of a difference for you to learn. It makes it easier for you.
Yes.
You understand what they're talking about, and we had that relation with those particular three. And Professor Rudy Jones, he was a nightmare because Rudy always had you smiling and laughing.
Yes, sir.
He had a joke coming out of someplace where he was talking about your teachers, he was talking about this one, that. Rudy was a funny man, and his stuff was real.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's see. Before we end, I want to ask you a few. Can you speak on why Professor Vee chose you and your father? Why did he choose you and your father? And we'll close out on that.
Because of the way we work with students, that we were teaching at a much younger age in the arts than should be. my father and myself started teaching, we weren't even black belts, we were brown belts. But because of our teaching ability, you know, Professor Rudy Jones and Professor Vee says, no, we got to do something for them. And that's when the first time we heard of black belt holders, they gave us black belt holders. And they were amazed at how we threw all sizes, all shapes, and we threw them where we protected them. A lot of guys teach, and they don't teach the protection end of the arts, how to protect your students from getting banged up so much. So down the road, they don't deal with a lot of people where they got knee replacements, arm replacements, this, that, all that. That's going to affect you later on, or even the very next day. How many people, they couldn't go to work the next day? You have to have a living. Or your younger student that couldn't go to school. So that protection aspect of it made it a big difference. You know, that's one thing where he brought both my father and myself onto like to Doc Powell's, to Soaky Little John Sugar, different ones. They said they're protecting them, but they're teaching them at the same time.
Yes, sir.
Yes, that was a big thing, protection.
Yes, sir. Okay. Well, I just want to say this. I witnessed this with my own eyes today. Now, I'm in my 60s. He's older than me, but I saw him do some of the 124 with the punches and the side kick in the front, the back, the double jump front kick, and I was amazed at his flexibility, his focus, and his speed. So I'm saying that to say, prepare yourself for part 2, because we're going to go into the documentation of Vee Jitsu, Vee Jitsu Te, 1 through 24, 65, 75. This man is brilliant. I've seen the documents, and the documents are brilliant. And if you don't have a qualified instructor, you can look at the document, but if you don't have a qualified instructor to interpret it and teach you, you won't know what you're looking at.
Exactly.
And I think that's brilliant. So I want to thank you, sir.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so much.
I hope you all enjoyed this. If you're a Vee Jitsu student, master, instructor, if you're a Sanukist, I know you enjoyed this. And any master that we did not mention, we will mention you in part 2, because I got a list of masters. I'm talking about, we're going to deal with C.W. Pulse and Grandmaster Ken Brown and his modern Vee Jitsu, and those who came under him and they're leading the way with that. We're going to deal with everybody. So I just want to thank you again. Thank you for tuning in to Sanukist Skills and Drills, the life and the upliftment of Dr. Moses Powell, Sanukist and Grand Professor Vee and Vee Jitsu.